When you walk through the hallowed halls of a grand museum or flip through the pages of a high-resolution art history book, you are conditioned to see certain things. You see mastery of brushstrokes. You see the play of light and shadow. You see the solemn, pious expressions of medieval bishops, kings, and knights, the pillars of our history. We are taught that these were the men who shaped our world, guided by deep spirituality and political power. But what if I told you that you've been looking at a lie? What if the history we accept is actually a cleverly constructed mask, hiding a reality so strange, so alien, that we barely have the language to describe it? There is a disturbing theory bubbling under the surface of alternative history. It suggests that the figures staring back at us from those centuries-old canvases might not be human at all. Or, at the very least, they are hiding a physical secret that changes everything we know about the past. This isn't about ghosts or demons in the biblical sense. This is about biology, technology, and a cover-up that has lasted for hundreds of years. To understand this, we have to stop looking at these paintings as art and start analyzing them as crime scene evidence. We need to look for the anomalies, the glitches in the matrix. And once you see the first glitch, you can never unsee it. It starts with a simple, almost anatomical question that no one seems to ask. Where are their ears? The anomaly of the missing ears. Let's begin our investigation with the most obvious yet most overlooked detail. Take a close look at the portraits of high-ranking clergy and nobility from the Middle Ages, particularly around the 15th and 16th centuries. Browse through dozens, even hundreds of them. You will start to notice a pattern that defies statistical probability. In an overwhelming number of these portraits, the subjects have no visible ears. Now, you might dismiss this immediately. You might say, well, it's just the fashion. They wore heavy headdresses, coifs, and high collars. And sure, fashion plays a role, but look closer. Even when the hair is pulled back or the headdress sits high, that specific area of the head is meticulously, obsessively covered. It's not just concealed, it's erased. Sometimes it's hidden by a thick lock of hair that looks unnatural, almost like a deliberate curtain. Other times, the skin where the ear should be is just a smooth, flat surface, as if the artist didn't know what an ear looked like. But these were master painters. They could render the reflection of a candle in a teardrop. Are we really supposed to believe they just forgot how to paint ears? Or is it possible that the subject sitting for the portrait didn't have human ears to begin with? This brings us to the mask hypothesis. Look at their faces again. The skin often appears too smooth, too perfect, almost waxy. The expressions are frozen, devoid of the micro-expressions that make a human face feel alive. Their eyes, often described as the windows to the soul, are cold, dark, and penetrating. They don't look at you, they look through you. It creates an uncanny valley effect. You get the sinking feeling that you aren't looking at a person, but at a mannequin, a statue, or more disturbingly, a biological entity wearing a prosthetic suit designed to look human. If these high-ranking figures were actually non-human entities trying to blend in with a human population, the first thing they would need is a disguise, a mask to cover their facial structure. But a mask has limitations. If your true form doesn't have external ears or has ears in a completely different location, you can't just glue fake ones on and hope they look real. The safest option is to establish a strict cultural rule. Holy men must cover their heads. By creating a fashion or religious mandate that requires that part of the head to be hidden, they solve the problem of anatomy without raising suspicion. The mystery of the hands. If the face is the mask, then the hands are the giveaway. Let's move our gaze down from the head to the hands of these mysterious figures. In portrait after portrait, we see hands raised in blessing or clutching sacred objects. But look at the texture. There are no wrinkles, no veins popping out, no pores, no cuticles. Even the fingernails often look missing or painted on. The official explanation is that they are wearing fine silk gloves, liturgical gloves. But this explanation falls apart when you look at the fit.
These gloves fit so perfectly, they look like a second skin, a seamless shell. If they are gloves, why would they mimic the shape of a hand so aggressively, yet lack the natural imperfections of leather or fabric? And if they are gloves, why wear them indoors during intimate portraits, at all times? Here is the darker implication. They aren't gloves. They are part of the suit. If you are an entity with a different skin texture, perhaps reptilian, perhaps gray, perhaps something biomechanical, you need to cover every square inch of your body. You cannot risk a handshake revealing your cold temperature or strange skin texture. So you wear a full body containment suit. The gloves are just the hand coverings of this suit. But the most damning evidence isn't the glove itself. It's what is attached to it. Zoom in on the fingers. You will often see strange, bulky rings. But these don't look like decorative jewelry. They don't have the typical setting of a gemstone meant to catch the light. Instead, they look functional. They have slits, grooves, and coils. They look industrial. To a modern engineer, these rings bear a striking resemblance to toroidal transformers or magnetic induction coils. A toroidal transformer is a type of electrical component used to transfer energy or convert currents. Why would a medieval bishop be wearing a component of a circuit board on his finger? Unless, of course, the glove wasn't just clothing. Unless the glove was an interface. Imagine the ring is actually a control unit. By moving their thumb or tapping the ring, the wearer could adjust the settings of the technology they were wielding. It transforms the glove from a symbol of purity into a functional piece of hardware. This wasn't fashion, it was a control panel. The staff, a weapon, not a walking stick. If the gloves are the interface, what were they controlling? This brings us to the most iconic symbol of power, the staff. The pastoral staff, or crozier, is said to represent the shepherd's crook, a symbol of guiding the flock. But look at the depictions in these paintings. That explanation feels like a cover story for children. In many of these artworks, the staffs are depicted as transparent. They are made of glass, crystal, or quartz. This is incredibly difficult to manufacture in the Middle Ages with such length and clarity. But even more strange is what's inside or wrapped around them. You often see a helix, a spiral of wire or a thin ribbon winding up the length of the transparent rod. Stop and think about what that looks like. A glass tube, a conductive wire coil wrapped around it. This isn't a walking stick. This is the schematic for a high-voltage induction coil. It looks like a winding for a Tesla coil or a particle accelerator component. We actually have physical proof of this. In certain European museums, there are preserved artifacts of these crystal staffs. They exist. They aren't just artistic interpretations. The artists were painting what they saw. They saw their leaders walking around with transparent rods containing spiral elements. So if this is a piece of technology, what did it do? A quartz rod, when subjected to mechanical stress or electrical current, exhibits piezoelectric properties. It can generate a charge. It can vibrate. If these staffs were coupled with the transformer rings on the gloves, we are looking at a wireless energy transmission device or perhaps a directed energy weapon. The shepherd's crook wasn't for herding sheep. It was a tool for manipulating energy fields. It could have been a communication device, an ancient smartphone, if you will, allowing the user to transmit voice or data over long distances. Or perhaps it was a defensive weapon, capable of discharging a shock to anyone who got too close to the holy figure. This gives a whole new meaning to the phrase, the fear of God. It wasn't spiritual fear, it was the fear of getting zapped by the guy in the gold suit. Temples as power plants. Now that we have established the characters, non-human entities in biosuits wielding high-tech rods, we need to understand their environment. Where did they live? Where did they work? They operated in cathedrals, temples, and basilicas. Historians tell us these massive structures were built solely for prayer. But look at the architecture with the eyes of an electrical engineer. These buildings are colossal. They are built with specific geometry aligned to magnetic north. They feature massive domes, tall spires, and flying buttresses. They are filled with metal, gold, silver, copper, and vast amounts of quartz-bearing stone like granite and limestone. There is a compelling theory that suggests these cathedrals were never designed for prayer. They were machines. They were gigantic energy harvesters. The tall spires acted as antennas, reaching up into the ionosphere to capture atmospheric electricity. The domes served as capacitors to store the charge. The specific vaulted ceilings created acoustic resonance chambers to amplify or tune this energy. The sheer scale of these buildings is excessive for simple worship. You don't need a ceiling that is 150 feet high just to mumble a prayer. But you do need that kind of volume and geometry if you are managing high-voltage electrostatic fields. The entire structure was a power plant, generating free, clean energy from the atmosphere itself. The suit, a Faraday cage. If the cathedral is a high-voltage power plant and the bishop is the operator working inside it, suddenly the clothing makes perfect sense. You cannot walk into a high-voltage environment wearing a tunic and sandals. You would be fried. You need protection.
Let's deconstruct the holy vestments, layer by layer. First, the undergarment, usually fine linen or silk. These are excellent insulators. This is the dielectric layer that separates the body from the conductive outer shell. Next, the outer robes, heavy, thick fabrics, famously embroidered with real gold and silver threads. Gold is one of the best conductors of electricity in existence. Why would you waste tons of gold thread just for decoration? You wouldn't. You are weaving a conductive mesh. You are creating a Faraday suit. A Faraday cage, or Maxwell cage, is a mesh of conductive material that shields its interior from external electric fields. If you wear a suit made of conductive gold mesh, the electricity flows around you, not through you. You can stand safely in the middle of a lightning storm or a high-voltage cathedral reactor. Then, the headgear, the mitre. It's often pointed, sometimes with two peaks. It usually features a gold band around the forehead and trailing strips of fabric down the back. This completes the cage. The gold band connects to the conductive suit, ensuring the head is protected. The shape might even have acted as a resonator or a cooling fin. And finally, the bells. Look at the hem of the high priest's robe. In biblical descriptions, in medieval depictions, they often have small golden bells attached. We are told this is for joyful noise. But in a power plant, a bell is a sensor. In a high-static environment, small metal objects will begin to vibrate or ring before a discharge occurs. The bells were an early warning system. If your hem starts jingling on its own, you know you are entering a danger zone of high voltage. So, the entire ensemble, the mask, the gloves, the gold robes, the funny hat, it wasn't a costume, it was a hazmat suit. It was a survival suit, designed to keep the entity alive while they operated the machinery of the cathedral. The cargo cult of religion. This brings us to the most profound and somewhat tragic part of our journey. If all of this was real technology, power plants, energy weapons, protective suits, why don't we see it working today? Why do we only see priests waving incense and mumbling words? The answer lies in a phenomenon called the cargo cult. During World War II, American military forces set up bases on remote Pacific islands. The indigenous islanders, who had never seen modern technology, watched in awe. They saw these strange men, the soldiers, clear the jungle, build long strips of ground, runways, and put on headsets with antennas. And then miracles happened. Giant steel birds descended from the sky, bringing cargo, food, clothing, medicine, tools. The islanders didn't understand the mechanics of aviation or radio waves. They just saw the ritual. Put on the headset, wave the wands, and the cargo comes. When the war ended, the Americans left. The cargo stopped coming. The islanders were desperate to bring the gods back. So, What did they do? They built replicas. They built airplanes out of straw and bamboo. They built control towers out of wood. They carved headphones out of coconuts and marched with wooden rifles. They mimicked the form of the technology perfectly, hoping to trigger the same result. But nothing happened. It was a ritual without function. Now, apply this logic to human history. Imagine a time, long before the 19th century, when these non-human rulers or high-tech operators were here. They ran the cathedral power plants. They wore the gold suits. They used the crystal staffs to heal, to communicate, to transport. The humans watched them. They saw the miracles, the lights, the levitation, the instant healing. They worshipped these operators as gods or saints. Then something happened. Maybe a war, maybe a catastrophe, or maybe they just left. The technology broke down. The power plants went silent. The crystal staffs stopped glowing. The humans, terrified and abandoned, tried to keep the system running. They remembered the visuals, but didn't understand the science. They thought, if we wear the gold robes, the power will return. If we hold the staff and say the words, the miracle will happen. So they began to copy. They replaced the complex technical fabric of the protective suits with heavy brocade and velvet. They replaced the functional toroidal transformers on the gloves with big, useless gemstones. They replaced the crystal induction staffs with gold-plated wooden sticks that did nothing. They replaced the acoustic levitation frequencies with choirs and organ music. They replaced the chemical decontamination smoke with frankincense and myrrh. What we see today in churches, cathedrals, and temples is a global cargo cult. It is a pantomime. We are acting out the procedures of a lost civilization, wearing the costumes of their engineers and praying to their broken machinery. The ritual is just the user manual that we have forgotten how to read. The reinterpretation of miracles.
Once you view history through this lens, the lens of lost technology, the stories of the saints and gods undergo a radical shift. They stop being magical and start being mechanical. Take the halo. We see it in thousands of paintings, a glowing ring of light around a saint's head. The church says it represents holiness. Physics says it represents a corona discharge. When a conductive object, like a helmet or a head, is in a high-voltage field, the air around it ionizes and glows. If you were standing in a charged cathedral wearing a conductive headband, you would literally have a glowing aura around your head. The artists weren't painting a spiritual metaphor. They were painting an electrical phenomenon. What about the levitation? There are countless stories of saints floating in the air during deep prayer. In a cathedral designed for acoustic resonance, powerful standing waves, acoustic levitation, could theoretically lift objects or people. If the operators knew how to tune the vibrations of the structure, anti-gravity wasn't a miracle. It was physics. Consider the voice of God. How many texts describe hearing a booming voice from the heavens or from a burning bush? If the high-tech operators had long-range audio projection or radio technology, speaking to a primitive human from a hidden location would be child's play. And finally, the icons. We treat religious icons as sacred images to be kissed and bowed to. But many of them are framed in elaborate metal casings, often with doors that open and close. What if the original icons were screens? What if they were video communication terminals? The saint appearing in the icon wasn't a painting, it was a live video feed from the central command. When the technology died, people replaced the black screens with paintings of the people they used to see on them. The disappearance and the legacy. The final piece of the puzzle is the timeline. When did the takeover happen? When did the change occur? The transcription suggests a shift around the 19th century, but the roots go deeper. The paintings we analyzed are from the 14th, 15th, and 16th centuries. This was the transition period. This was the era when the old rulers, the ones with the missing ears and the high-tech suits, were slowly fading into myth. The artists of the Renaissance might have been the last generation to see the remnants of the real gear. They painted what they saw, preserving the clues for us. But by the 19th century, the Industrial Revolution took over. A new kind of technology emerged: coal, steam, and dirty electricity. The clean, atmospheric energy of the past was forgotten. The cathedrals were relegated to religious buildings only. The history books were rewritten to exclude the non-human influence. The science of the ancients became the magic of the folklore, and eventually the religion of the masses. We are living in the aftermath of a great amnesia. We walk past the evidence every day. We look at the spires of the churches and see architecture, not antennas. We look at the bishop's staff and see a symbol, not a circuit. We look at the portraits and see bad art, not biological anomalies. Conclusion: the invitation to look again. So where does this leave us? I'm not asking you to blindly believe that lizard people ruled the Middle Ages. I'm not asking you to burn your history books. This is a thought experiment. It is an exercise in pattern recognition. The purpose of this journey is to break the conditioning that tells us history is settled. History is never settled. It is written by the victors. And sometimes the victors have a vested interest in hiding the source of their power. The next time you visit a museum, don't just glance at the paintings. Stare at them. Look for the ears. Look at the hands. Look at the devices they are holding. Ask yourself why a spiritual leader needs a gold-plated suit and a crystal rod. The truth is often hiding in plain sight, camouflaged by tradition. We have been taught to worship the cargo, but we have forgotten the ship. The clues are there, painted in oil and carved in stone, waiting for someone with the eyes to see them. Maybe the Dark Ages weren't dark because of a lack of knowledge. Maybe they were dark because the lights, the real electric lights, went out. And we've been stumbling around in the shadows ever since, wearing the costumes of giants, wondering why the magic stopped working. The reality of our past is likely far stranger, far more advanced, and far more terrifying than we are allowed to imagine. The evidence is staring right at you. You just have to open your eyes and maybe check to see if the person staring at you has ears.